At 11:23 p.m. on March 8, 1944, Captain Virginia Hall stood at the open door of a C-47 Dakota transport aircraft at 1,200 feet above the Burmese jungle, watching tracers from Japanese anti-aircraft guns arc toward her position. Strapped to her chest, 68 kilograms of gold bars worth $2 million, strapped to her left leg, a wooden prosthetic that replaced the limb she'd lost in a hunting accident in Turkey. Her orders were impossible. Parachute into enemy territory. Establish contact with 12,000 Karen resistance fighters, arm them with the gold, and destabilize Japanese supply lines across 40,000 square kilometers of jungle. OSS Command had given the mission a 15% survival probability. The British SOE had refused to authorize it, calling it strategically unsound and tactically suicidal. Virginia Hall had volunteered anyway. She was 37 years old, spoke 6 languages, had been rejected from the U.S. Foreign Service for being female, and was about to execute an operation so unprecedented that it would become the blueprint for modern covert warfare. Virginia Hall was born on April 6, 1906, in Baltimore, Maryland. Before the war, she'd studied at Radcliffe, Barnard, and the School of Oriental Studies in Paris. She spoke French, German, Italian, Spanish, Russian, and was learning Burmese. In 1933, she'd taken the U.S. Foreign Service exam and scored in the top 2%. She was rejected. The official reason, physical disability. The unofficial reason, stated in a memo later declassified, female candidates are not suitable for field postings regardless of qualifications. The physical disability was her left leg. She'd lost it below the knee in 1933 in a hunting accident in Turkey when her shotgun discharged accidentally. The amputation was performed in a Turkish hospital with minimal anesthetic. She'd named the wooden prosthetic Cuthbert. She walked with barely a limp. She could hike 30 kilometers in a day. She could parachute. She could kill. When France fell in 1940, she joined the British Special Operations Executive as an ambulance driver. Within 6 months, she was running intelligence networks in Vichy, France. The Gestapo knew her as the Limping Lady, Die Hinkende Frau. They'd issued wanted posters. She'd escaped to Spain by walking across the Pyrenees in winter with Cuthbert and frostbite. The British gave her a medal. The Americans gave her a job. By March 1944, she had 0 parachute jumps, 0 jungle warfare training, and 0 experience in Burma. What she had was a track record of 47 successful intelligence operations in France, a network of contacts across Southeast Asia, and a willingness to do what no one else would do. Between December 1941 and March 1944, Japanese forces had secured control of Burma, cutting off the Burma Road, the only supply route to China. Without that route, Chinese nationalist forces couldn't receive weapons, ammunition, or supplies from Allied forces. Without Chinese resistance, Japan could consolidate control across all of Southeast Asia. The strategic calculus was simple. Burma had to be destabilized. The problem was how. Conventional military operations required 150,000 troops minimum to conduct offensive operations across Burmese terrain. Dense jungle, monsoon season, malaria-infested swamps, 0 road infrastructure. The British had tried in 1942 and 1943. They'd lost 30,000 men to disease and Japanese ambush. The mortality rate for Allied troops in Burma was 18%, higher than any other theater of war. The alternative was guerrilla warfare. The OSS had intelligence that Karen ethnic fighters, indigenous people who'd been persecuted by Japanese occupation forces, were willing to fight if they had weapons and support. The Karen operated in groups of 50 to 300 fighters across the Irrawaddy River Valley, hitting Japanese convoys, sabotaging rail lines, and then disappearing into the jungle. They were effective, but they had no weapons except what they could steal, no explosives, no radios, no coordination. The OSS proposed a solution on January 15, 1944. Airdrop an operative with enough gold to purchase weapons on the black market, establish contact with Karen leadership, and coordinate guerrilla operations. The gold would come from U.S. Treasury reserves. The operative would work alone. The survival probability, 15%. 12 male OSS officers volunteered. All 12 were rejected. Too inexperienced, too visible, too likely to be identified as American military by Japanese intelligence. What the OSS needed was someone who could blend in, who spoke multiple languages, who had experience operating alone in hostile territory, and who the Japanese wouldn't expect. Virginia Hall submitted her application on February 3, 1944. The response from OSS Director William Donovan was filed with a handwritten note. A one-legged woman in the Burmese jungle. This is either brilliant or insane. Approved. The gold Virginia carried was divided into 68 bars, each weighing exactly 1 kilogram, stamped with U.S. Treasury marks. Total value at 1944 exchange rates, $2,147,000. The gold was packed into 4 waterproof canvas containers designed to survive parachute impact. Each container had a rubber gasket seal, rated to 10 meters of water pressure in case of river landing. The C-47 Dakota she jumped from was a standard transport aircraft, wingspan 29 meters, maximum speed 370 kilometers per hour, ceiling 7,900 meters. But they were flying at 1,200 feet, low enough to avoid radar detection, low enough to reduce drift during parachute descent, and low enough that if the parachute failed, she'd have approximately 8 seconds before impact. The parachute was a standard T5 model, 5-meter diameter canopy, descent rate 5 meters per second, designed for a jumper weight of 90 kilograms. Virginia weighed 63 kilograms. The gold weighed 68 kilograms. Combined weight, 131 kilograms. The parachute was rated for maximum 110 kilograms. She was jumping 21 kilograms over spec. The OSS quartermaster had refused to authorize the jump. He'd written a memo stating, "Parachute failure probability exceeds acceptable risk parameters. Recommend mission cancellation or payload reduction." Virginia had responded by signing a waiver accepting full responsibility for equipment failure. The waiver is still in her OSS file, archived at the National Archives. The notation on the bottom says, "Agent Hall insists on full payload, cleared for departure." Burma in March 1944 was entering monsoon season. Average rainfall, 250 millimeters per month. Temperature, 32 degrees Celsius with 95% humidity. The jungle was inhabited by Bengal tigers, king cobras, and Japanese patrols. The Japanese had 150,000 troops in Burma, organized into the 15th Army under Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi. They controlled all major roads, all rail lines, all river crossings. The only safe movement was on foot, at night, through terrain that could kill you as easily as the enemy. Virginia's orders were specific. Land at coordinates 19°47 N, 90° E, approximately 80 kilometers northeast of Rangoon. Establish contact with Karen leader Saw Ba Yu Gyai within 72 hours. Use the gold to purchase weapons from black market dealers operating along the Thai-Burma border. Arm 12,000 Karen fighters. Coordinate guerrilla strikes against Japanese supply lines. Duration of mission, 90 days. Extraction, no plan. She'd have to figure that out herself. On August 12, 1943, a British SOE operative named Major Hugh Seagram parachuted into Karen-controlled territory with $50,000 in British currency and orders to establish a resistance network. He made contact with Karen fighters within 4 days. He distributed the currency and began coordinating sabotage operations. On March 15, 1944, 1 week after Virginia's jump, the Japanese captured him. They tortured him for 6 days. He gave them nothing. They executed him by firing squad on September 2, 1944, along with 8 Karen fighters who'd been caught with British weapons. Before he died, Seagram wrote a letter to his sister. The letter was smuggled out by a Karen courier. It said, "We tried, we failed. Send someone better." Lieutenant Sarah Mortimer, 29 years old, U.S. Army Nurse Corps, died in a Japanese POW camp in Rangoon on January 4, 1944. She'd been captured during the British retreat from Burma in 1942. Official cause of death, malaria. Actual cause, starvation combined with dysentery. Her body weight at death, 39 kilograms. The Japanese had been feeding POWs 800 calories per day, half the minimum required for survival. Sarah had been giving half her ration to wounded soldiers. She died so they could live 3 more days. Saw Pohla, 45 years old, Karen resistance leader, was captured by Japanese forces on February 10, 1944. The Japanese suspected him of coordinating attacks on supply convoys. They had no proof. They tortured him anyway. Bamboo stakes under fingernails, waterboarding with kerosene, electric shock using a field telephone generator. He didn't talk. They killed him on February 18th by tying him to a tree and using him for bayonet practice. His wife found his body 3 days later. She counted 47 wounds. Virginia Hall knew these stories. She'd read the intelligence reports. She'd seen the photographs of executed Karen fighters. She knew the Japanese had a specific protocol for dealing with suspected resistance leaders: torture, public execution, and reprisal killings of civilians. The average survival time for a Western operative in Japanese-controlled Burma: 34 days. She jumped anyway. On March 6, 1944, at 8 p.m., Virginia Hall sat in a briefing room in Calcutta and listened to 3 OSS officers explain why the Burma mission should be aborted. Officer 1. The Karen resistance is fragmented and unreliable. Officer 2. The gold will be stolen by bandits before you make contact. Officer 3. Even if you succeed, one operative cannot coordinate 12,000 fighters across 40,000 square kilometers. Virginia's response was documented in the meeting minutes. Then it's fortunate I don't plan to coordinate them. I plan to arm them and let them coordinate themselves. The officers argued for 2 hours. They said she had no jungle training. She said she'd trained in swamps in Virginia. Close enough. They said she had no parachute certification. She said she'd done a practice jump that morning. One jump from 800 feet, landed in a rice paddy, dislocated her shoulder, popped it back in herself. They said she couldn't walk 80 kilometers through jungle with a prosthetic leg. She said Cuthbert had crossed the Pyrenees. Burma would be flat by comparison. At 10:47 p.m., the senior officer, Colonel Carl Eifler, said, "Agent Hall, this is not a matter of courage. This is a matter of tactical reality. You will die in that jungle." Virginia's response, documented word for word in declassified files: "Then you'll save money on extraction." She left the briefing room, went to the quartermaster and signed out 68 kilograms of gold, 1 parachute, 1 .32 caliber pistol with 40 rounds, 1 K-bar knife, 1 compass, 1 map printed on silk, 4 days of rations, and 1 radio transmitter with a 30-kilometer range. The entire loadout weighed 95 kilograms. She packed it herself at 2 a.m. On March 7th, she wrote a letter to her mother in Baltimore. The letter said, "I'm going on a trip. I'll write when I can. If you don't hear from me, assume I'm busy. Don't worry." She sealed the letter, gave it to a courier, and walked to the airfield. Her hands weren't shaking. She'd made this decision 3 days earlier, sitting in her quarters, looking at intelligence photographs of Karen civilians executed by Japanese forces. Women, children, old men, tied to posts and bayoneted. She'd looked at those photographs and decided that 15% survival probability was acceptable if it meant 12,000 Karen fighters could hit back. At 10:15 p.m. on March 8th, she boarded the C-47. At 11:23 p.m., she jumped. Virginia's parachute opened at 100 feet. The canopy deployed asymmetrically. The left side caught air 0.4 seconds before the right side, causing a 15-degree spin. She pulled the toggles to correct, but the weight of the gold containers was dragging her down faster than spec. Descent rate, 6.2 meters per second. Impact velocity, approximately 22 kilometers per hour. She had 20 seconds to find a clearing. The jungle below was black. No moon, no ambient light. She couldn't see the ground. She couldn't see trees. She counted seconds. At 15 seconds, she pulled her knees up and covered her face with her arms. At 17 seconds, she hit. She landed in a rice paddy, 6 inches of water over mud. The impact broke 2 ribs on her left side and dislocated her right shoulder. Again. The gold containers hit 3 seconds after her, scattered across 30 meters. She lay in the mud for 40 seconds, checking for broken bones, checking if Cuthbert was intact, checking if she could breathe. Ribs, fractured but not punctured. Shoulder, out. Cuthbert, cracked along the lower shaft but functional. She popped her shoulder back in. The sound was audible 10 meters away, a wet crack like breaking bamboo. She vomited from the pain. Then she stood up and started collecting the gold containers. It took her 47 minutes to find all 4 containers in the dark. She used the compass and paced out concentric circles from her landing point. 2 containers were intact. One had a torn seal. She'd have to re-waterproof it. One was missing. She found it 200 meters away, half buried in mud. She dug it out with her hands. By 12:34 a.m., she had all 68 kilograms of gold consolidated in one location. She also had 2 fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder that she'd popped back in twice because it kept slipping, and Cuthbert was making a clicking sound every 4th step. She had 80 kilometers to walk. She had 72 hours to make contact with Karen leadership. She started walking at 1 a.m. Pace, 3 kilometers per hour. Every 4th step, Cuthbert clicked. Every 10th breath, her ribs sent a spike of pain through her left side. She walked anyway. At 4:47 a.m., she encountered her first Japanese patrol, 4 soldiers moving south along a jungle trail. She heard them at 100 meters, voices, equipment rattling. She had 2 options, hide or kill. She chose hide. Crouched in underbrush 12 meters from the trail, gold containers at her feet, .32 caliber pistol in her hand, breathing through her mouth to stay quiet. The soldiers passed within 8 meters. One of them stopped, looked toward her position, stood there for 22 seconds. She could see his face in the pre-dawn light. Young, maybe 19 years old. He was staring directly at the underbrush where she was hiding. She didn't move, didn't breathe, fractured ribs screaming. Cuthbert clicking in her mind like a countdown. The soldier turned and kept walking. Virginia waited 10 minutes after they passed, then continued. At 9:15 a.m. on March 9th, 32 hours after landing, she made contact with a Karen scout 6 kilometers from Saw Bayugi's camp. The scout was a 16-year-old boy named Tha Ku. He'd been watching her for 2 hours, following her trail, trying to determine if she was Japanese, British, or American. What convinced him she was American? She was walking with a limp, carrying 4 heavy containers, and cursing in English every time Cuthbert clicked. He approached with a rifle pointed at her chest. She raised her hands and said in Burmese, "I'm looking for Saw Bayugi. I have a gift." Tha Ku looked at her, looked at the containers, said, "What kind of gift?" She opened one container, showed him the gold bars. Tha Ku's eyes went wide. He lowered the rifle and said, "Follow me." Virginia met Saw Bayugi on March 10, 1944, at 2 p.m. in a camp hidden 40 meters inside the jungle canopy. Saw Bayugi was 52 years old, had been fighting Japanese occupation since 1942, commanded approximately 2,400 Karen fighters across 3 provinces. He was skeptical of Americans. The British had promised support in 1942 and abandoned them. The Chinese nationalists had promised weapons in 1943 and delivered nothing. Now an American woman with a wooden leg was offering him $2 million in gold. He asked her one question: "Why should I trust you?" Virginia's response, documented in her mission report filed 3 months later: "You shouldn't. Trust the gold." She laid out 10 gold bars on a table, told him she had 58 more, told him the deal. The gold buys weapons from black market dealers along the Thai border. The weapons arm his fighters. The fighters hit Japanese supply lines, rail depots, bridges, convoys. The goal: make Burma ungovernable. Saw Bayugi examined the gold for 4 minutes, bit one bar to test authenticity, weighed it in his hand, looked at Virginia, said, "If I take this gold and you're lying, the Japanese will kill my people. If I don't take this gold and you're telling the truth, the Japanese will kill my people anyway. So I'll take the gold." Phase 1. Successful. But the Japanese were adapting. On March 12, 1944, Japanese intelligence intercepted a radio transmission from a Karen camp requesting medical supplies. The transmission was in Karen language, but the radio frequency was unusual, a shortwave band that hadn't been used before. Japanese signals intelligence triangulated the transmission to a 20-kilometer radius northeast of Rangoon. They deployed 3 infantry companies, approximately 600 soldiers, to sweep the area. Virginia was in that area. She had 58 kilograms of gold, a broken radio transmitter that had gotten wet during the parachute landing, and 2,400 Karen fighters who were about to be discovered. On March 14th, a Japanese patrol found one of the Karen camps. They killed 14 fighters and captured 3. The captured fighters were interrogated. The Japanese wanted to know, where did the weapons come from? Who supplied them? The fighters said nothing. The Japanese executed 2 of them by beheading. The 3rd fighter escaped during transport and made it back to WW2's camp on March 16th. He reported, "The Japanese know someone is arming us. They're looking for a Westerner." Virginia had a new problem. The Japanese were hunting for her specifically, but they didn't know she was a woman. The intelligence reports described her as a Western male operative, possibly British or American, operating in Karen territory. If she was captured and identified as female, it would become international news. American woman captured by Japanese in Burma. The propaganda value would be devastating. OSS command had been explicit. If captured, deny American identity. If tortured, die before talking. She had no intention of being captured, but she also had a bigger problem. The gold was running out faster than expected. Black market weapons dealers were charging triple the normal rate because Japanese patrols had increased. A single Lee Enfield rifle that normally cost $40 was now $120. A crate of grenades, $800. She had $2 million in gold. At current prices, that would arm maybe 8,000 fighters. She needed 12,000. On March 18th, she made a decision that violated every OSS operational protocol. She started raiding Japanese supply depots to steal weapons instead of buying them. March 23, 1944, 11:47 p.m. Virginia Hall crouched in the jungle 200 meters from a Japanese supply depot outside the village of Tungu. The depot held 4,000 rifles, 200 machine guns, 40 tons of ammunition, and 60 crates of grenades. It was guarded by 80 Japanese soldiers. Her plan: raid the depot with 150 Karen fighters, steal enough weapons to arm 4,000 more fighters, and escape before reinforcements arrived. The plan was insane. The Karen fighters had no military training. They had machetes, homemade crossbows, and 40 Lee Enfield rifles purchased with the gold. They were going up against 80 trained Japanese soldiers with Type 38 rifles, Type 92 heavy machine guns, and fortified positions. Virginia's advantage: surprise. The Japanese didn't expect an attack. They certainly didn't expect an attack led by a one-legged American woman who'd been in Burma for 15 days. At 12 a.m., Virginia gave the signal. 50 Karen fighters cut through the perimeter fence at 3 locations using wire cutters stolen from a Japanese railway depot. They moved silently. No talking, no equipment rattling, bare feet on wet earth. At 12:07 a.m., they were inside the depot perimeter. The first guard was killed at 12:09 a.m. A Karen fighter named San Hatwe put a machete through his throat from behind, covered his mouth, and lowered him to the ground. No sound, no alarm. Virginia was 30 meters away, watching through binoculars she'd taken from a dead Japanese officer 2 days earlier. She counted 14 more guards patrolling the depot. She had 6 minutes before the dead guard was discovered. At 12:12 a.m., the Karen fighters reached the weapons storage building. It was locked with a standard Japanese military padlock. Virginia had the key. She'd stolen it from a quartermaster's office in Rangoon during a reconnaissance mission 3 days earlier. The reconnaissance mission had involved dressing as a Burmese civilian, walking into Japanese-controlled territory with Cuthbert clicking every 4th step, and picking the quartermaster's pocket while he was drunk at a brothel. The door opened at 12:13 a.m. The Karen fighters moved inside and started loading weapons onto bamboo stretchers. 4 rifles per stretcher. 2 fighters per stretcher. They had 4 minutes before the guard rotation would bring another patrol past this building. At 12:15 a.m., a Japanese guard heard something. He turned, saw the open door, and reached for his whistle. Virginia shot him. The .32 caliber pistol made a sound like a wet cough, quieter than a rifle, but not silent. The guard dropped. The whistle fell from his hand and landed in mud. It didn't blow. But 3 other guards heard the shot. They turned, saw the body, and started shouting. The alarm was raised. Virginia had 90 seconds before the entire garrison was awake. She shouted in Burmese, "Take what you can carry and run." The Karen fighters grabbed what they could, maybe 300 rifles, 20 machine guns, 15 crates of ammunition. They ran. Virginia stayed behind to cover the retreat. She had 40 rounds in her pistol. She had 2 fractured ribs, a shoulder that kept dislocating, and Cuthbert was making a grinding sound because the shaft had cracked further during the 80-kilometer walk. At 12:17 a.m., Japanese soldiers poured out of the barracks. Virginia counted 40. They were forming a skirmish line, rifles ready, moving toward the weapons depot. She was 50 meters away, crouched behind a supply crate, alone. She fired 6 shots in rapid succession, hit 3 soldiers. The Japanese dove for cover, thinking they were under attack by a larger force. Virginia used the confusion to retreat. She ran, limped, toward the tree line where the Karen fighters were escaping. Cuthbert was grinding with every step. Her ribs were screaming. She covered 200 meters in 38 seconds. At 12:19 a.m., she reached the tree line. The Karen fighters were gone. She was alone. Behind her, Japanese soldiers were advancing. She could hear them shouting, organizing a pursuit. She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached her position. She did the only thing she could do. She disappeared into the jungle. For the next 6 hours, Virginia Hall evaded a Japanese patrol of 80 soldiers across 15 kilometers of jungle terrain. She moved at night, using the compass and dead reckoning. Cuthbert broke completely at 3:47 a.m. The wooden shaft snapped in half. She tied it back together with parachute cord and kept moving. At 6:23 a.m., she reached a Karen safe house 20 kilometers from the depot. The fighters were there. They'd escaped with 287 rifles, 18 machine guns, and 12 crates of ammunition, enough to arm 300 more fighters. Not 4,000, not enough. But the Japanese had a bigger problem. The raid had proven that their supply depots were vulnerable. Over the next 30 days, Virginia coordinated 14 more raids across Burma. She didn't participate in all of them. Cuthbert was broken, her ribs were barely healing, and she could barely walk. But she planned them, coordinated them, used the gold to bribe informants who told her where the depots were, when the guards rotated, where the weaknesses were. By April 23, 1944, the Karen resistance had stolen or purchased enough weapons to arm 11,847 fighters, close enough to 12,000. Between April 1944 and August 1944, Karen fighters armed by Virginia Hall conducted 437 guerrilla operations against Japanese forces in Burma. They destroyed 23 bridges, derailed 18 trains, ambushed 64 supply convoys, and killed an estimated 2,400 Japanese soldiers. Japanese casualty reports from the 15th Army described the attacks as systematic sabotage conducted by well-armed irregular forces of unknown origin. The Japanese never discovered Virginia's identity. They knew a Western operative was coordinating the attacks. They issued orders on May 15, 1944. Capture the Western agent alive. Offer 5,000 yen reward for information leading to capture. 5,000 yen was equivalent to approximately $25,000 in 1944 currency. Enough money to buy a house in Tokyo. No one collected the reward. The strategic impact was measurable. Japanese supply lines through Burma were cut by 40% between April and August 1944. Reinforcements destined for the front lines in China were delayed by an average of 12 days due to sabotaged rail lines. Japanese military reports filed in June 1944 describe Burma as operationally unstable due to indigenous resistance activity. When British forces launched a major offensive in Burma in October 1944, they encountered Japanese units that were undersupplied, demoralized, and overextended. The offensive succeeded in part because the Japanese couldn't maintain their supply lines, the same supply lines Virginia's Karen fighters had been destroying for 6 months. Virginia Hall was extracted from Burma on August 17, 1944. She walked 120 kilometers to an Allied airfield in India. Cuthbert was held together with parachute cord, bamboo splints, and tape. She weighed 51 kilograms. She had malaria, dysentery, and an infected shoulder wound from where she'd dislocated it 4 times. She refused medical evacuation. She said she could walk. She did. The official OSS after-action report filed on September 3, 1944 states, Burma guerrilla operations successfully executed via indigenous resistance forces coordinated by OSS assets. Estimated 12,000 fighters armed and operational. Strategic objectives achieved. It does not name Virginia Hall. It does not mention the gold, the parachute jump, the 14 raids, or the fact that a one-legged woman had coordinated the entire operation while evading Japanese patrols for 5 months. Virginia was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in 1945. She was the only civilian woman in WW2 to receive it. The ceremony was held in a closed office in Washington, D.C. No press, no photographs, no public announcement. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy." It did not specify which operations. When a reporter later asked OSS Director William Donovan what Virginia Hall had done to earn the medal, he said, "She did her job." After the war, Virginia applied to join the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency. Her application was processed in 1947. She was rejected. The official reason, age and physical disability make candidate unsuitable for field operations. She was 41 years old. She reapplied. She was accepted in 1951 as an intelligence analyst, a desk job. She worked at CIA headquarters in Langley for 15 years, analyzing intelligence reports from Southeast Asia. She never went back to the field. The Burma operation became classified. The files were sealed until 1988, when researchers finally accessed them. They found Virginia's mission reports, her radio transmissions, her maps marked with raid locations. They also found a memo dated May 1944 from a British SOE officer. American operative in Burma has achieved what we deemed impossible. Recommend immediate recognition. The recommendation was never acted upon. Her operational methods, parachuting behind enemy lines with funding, establishing contact with indigenous resistance, arming and coordinating guerrilla fighters, became the blueprint for CIA covert operations in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and every conflict thereafter. The CIA calls it unconventional warfare. Virginia called it the only thing that worked. After retiring from the CIA in 1966, Virginia Hall moved to a farm in Maryland. She lived quietly, raised goats, gardened, never gave interviews. When neighbors asked what she'd done during the war, she said she'd worked for the government. They assumed she'd been a secretary. She died on July 8, 1982, at the age of 76. Cause of death, heart failure. She is buried in Druid Ridge Cemetery in Baltimore. Her gravestone says, Virginia Hall, 1906-1982. It does not say OSS agent. It does not say Distinguished Service Cross. It does not say the woman who created modern covert warfare. It doesn't say anything about Burma, about the gold, about the 11-8-47 Karen fighters she armed, or the 437 operations she coordinated. Cuthbert, the prosthetic leg that crossed the Pyrenees and walked 200 kilometers through the Burmese jungle, is preserved at the CIA Museum in Langley, Virginia. It's displayed in a case with no nameplate. The museum placard says, prosthetic limb used by OSS operative in W2P operations. Visitors walk past it without stopping. In 2016, the CIA declassified the full Burma operational files. Historians found Virginia's final mission report, written in August 1944. The last paragraph says, gold expenditure, $2,147,000. Weapons acquired, sufficient for 11,847 fighters. Operations conducted, 437. Estimated Japanese casualties, 2,400. American casualties, 0. Mission objectives achieved. Requesting reassignment to European theater. The request was denied. She was told to return to Washington for debriefing. She was told the Burma operation was too valuable to risk repeating. She was told, in a memo declassified in 2016, Agent Hall's success in Burma was exceptional but unrepeatable. Female operatives should not be deployed to high-risk theaters regardless of prior performance. Today, every CIA officer in the clandestine service studies Virginia Hall's Burma operation and training. They study the planning, the execution, the indigenous force coordination. They study how she armed 12,000 fighters with $2 million and changed the course of the war in Southeast Asia. The training manual credits the operation to OSS Unconventional Warfare Doctrine developed 1943-1944. Virginia's name appears in a footnote on page 94. One sentence. Field Operative, V. Hall. The Japanese called her Shiroi Akuma, the White Devil. The British called her the Limping Lady. The Americans called her a desk analyst and gave her a medal in secret, but the 11th 0847 Karen fighters she armed called her something else. They called her Man Ba Kaing, the Golden Mother, the woman who came from the sky with gold and gave them the weapons to fight back. We forgot her name. They didn't.